Picture a Europe unsure where the first strike will land. Not because war is certain, but because borders are more fragile today than they have been in the last 30 years. All it takes is a spark. Mistake. A bad estimate. The continent's most critical points are suddenly under pressure, not from a major front, but from an inconspicuous place that is quietly discussed today. In recent months, the number of experts asking one question has been growing. If there were an escalation between Europe and Russia, where would the decisive point be? Which place might not withstand the first onslaught? What would that mean for the rest of the continent? Now comes the key part, since the biggest cities don't always decide everything. Sometimes a breakthrough just 100 kilometers wide is enough. Sometimes it's a single port. Sometimes it's a cable on the seafloor. And that's not all. Thank you. In Europe, debate is growing over where decisions would be made if tensions with Russia turned into a crisis. Not because it's clear what will happen, but because analysts are pointing out places where even a relatively small move could trigger a large domino effect. Today we'll look at 5 such points. Each one is different, each is vulnerable for a different reason, and each would mean a completely different type of problem for Europe in a crisis situation. The first will be the Suwałki corridor, one of the most discussed lines on the continent. You're watching the Beyond Borders channel. Let's begin. The Suwałki corridor is a narrow land strip between Poland and Lithuania. On the map, it looks inconspicuous, but in discussions about Europe's security, it's one of the most frequently mentioned points. Just take a closer look. To the west is Kaliningrad, a Russian enclave with heavy militarization. To the east is Belarus, an ally of Moscow. And between these two areas lies the only land connection NATO has with the Baltic states. If escalation occurred in Europe, this is where it would be decided if Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania stay connected to the alliance or become isolated. This corridor isn't wide, estimated at around 100 kilometers or less in some areas. And that means a mechanized offensive could make a critical breakthrough here very quickly if a strong defense wasn't prepared. That's why NATO analysts discussed the Suwałki corridor for years before the Ukraine war, and that's why I also have a separate long video about it on my channel where we analyze it in detail. For now, just knowing the essentials is enough. The Suwałki corridor is the first filter that will show whether Europe is ready. If NATO can hold it, the Baltic states remain connected to the rest of the alliance and logistics work. If it falls, defending northeastern Europe becomes much harder. This leads to another point, a city that could challenge Europe not due to geography, but because of identity. It only takes one incident and it could be too late. Narva, Estonia, this is a different kind of weak point. Unlike the Suwałki Gap, it's not a bottleneck, but a city where conflict can emerge subtly and quietly without major troop movements. In Narva, it's about more than geography, it's identity. Over 80% of residents speak Russian and feel culturally and socially closer to the east than to Tallinn. In times of peace, that might not mean anything. In times of tension, such demographics can carry a lot of weight. Analysts have long pointed out that Narva is exactly the place where a crisis could arise in a different way than with a column of tanks. All it takes is a provocation, a local incident, information chaos, or a narrative about protecting Russian-speaking residents. Then it's no longer about a major strike on the map, but about gradually gaining control through hybrid tools, sabotage, agitation, disinformation campaigns, and diversion. And this brings us to the essential point. Narva is not a problem because Estonia could be occupied from there. The problem is that something could arise here that Europe doesn't like to deal with, a disputed territory within NATO. And if the situation escalated here, the question is how quickly and how united the alliance would respond. Article 5 is not an automatic button, it's a political decision. Narva poses a societal risk, unlike the Suwałki corridor, which is a logistical risk. That's the hardest kind to prevent because when tension arises, it's no longer just about the map, but the people on it. The next point is different. This time, it's about an area where border size matters, not city size. Now we'll move north to Finland. Finland and the northern border of Europe. Finland has something that no other NATO country has, the longest border with Russia. More than 1,300 kilometers of forests, lakes, tundra, and sparsely populated areas. Defending this territory is very challenging. It's an area where the classic front line doesn't work, and where movements are slow, through difficult terrain and in conditions that favor whoever attacks faster and more unpredictably. Finland, meanwhile, has a quality army, good training, and experience with harsh winters. If escalation occurred, the issue wouldn't be the soldiers' strength. The problem is that such a border can't be controlled everywhere at once. If there were sabotage, infiltration, or a rapid breakthrough in a selected section, the response would have to be immediate. The northern axis of Europe would shift from a border to a zone of high tactical uncertainty. Another thing analysts are dealing with is logistics. Finland is large, but the roads are sparse. Military convoys often traveled hundreds of kilometers on one-way routes. What takes hours in Poland could take days in the north, and especially in times of crisis, days are often a luxury that Europe cannot afford. The summary of all this is simple. Finland is not militarily weak but vulnerable because of its geography, and even a small breakthrough could create great pressure on NATO, which would have to respond in several places at once. While the Suwałki corridor and Narva are points that attract attention, Finland is a long line where the risk spreads out over space. And that's a different kind of challenge, but now let's move on to a place that could spark the conflict without involving a NATO member directly. A weakness that doesn't lie on the front line but on the periphery. And that's exactly why it's so sensitive, the Moldova and Transnistria. Moldova is a specific case. It's not a NATO member or on the main front line, yet it's often cited in security analyses. The reason is simple. If there were to be a growing escalation in Europe, a parallel conflict could arise here, which would start outside of Article 5. No requirement for a collective response or immediate alliance intervention. That's why many see it as the easiest entry into a larger crisis. This region has another specific layer, Transnistria. A narrow strip of land with a long-standing pro-Russian presence and ammunition stockpiles. Formally, it is part of Moldova. De facto, it is a breakaway region with its own administration and ties to Moscow. If tension were to arise here, it wouldn't be through a large invasion, but rather through political pressure, destabilization, and the narrative of protecting the Russian-speaking population. A mechanism very similar to the one that once appeared in Donbass. No large number of tanks, just question marks at first. NATO's problem is elsewhere. If a conflict were to arise in Moldova, the alliance would have to decide whether to intervene outside its own territory. It's not a simple answer. It's not an automatic step. And that's exactly what makes Moldova a place where Europe's resolve can be tested without the risk of an immediate collective response. If the West doesn't respond, a precedent will be set, and a precedent is often more dangerous than the first attack. However, this still isn't the most unusual point discussed in analytical studies. A space that doesn't look like a battlefield at all. A place where you don't hear cannons, but where the same chaos as on the front lines can arise. And yet all it takes is one cut. Now comes the final chapter. The North Sea and the underwater cables. The North Sea is not a front line. It's not even a border with Russia. And yet it's an area where decisions could be made before a single tank moves. The reason is simple. Beneath the surface of the North Sea lies infrastructure that keeps Europe running. Optical data cables, energy interconnections, gas pipelines, electric lines. Places that aren't protected by weapons, but trust that they will remain unharmed. Analysts warn that this is exactly where a conflict could arise without us seeing it immediately. A cable cut, gas pipeline explosion, drone strike on a substation, or sabotage of energy platforms. A cyber attack combined with physical damage to one branch can create a local network collapse, which then spreads further. It's not a scenario that requires a large army. It's a scenario where just a few people, a ship, a submarine, or a drone are enough, and the result can be the same as with an artillery attack: chaos. Nord Stream showed one thing very clearly. Europe can monitor borders, armies, and the movement of equipment, but underwater the rules are different. Their defense is complex, costly, and mostly invisible. And that's exactly why the North Sea is considered a risk. Not because the Russian army is stationed there, but because what we can't see is vulnerable. And we only notice it when it stops working. This brings our list to a close. Suwałki corridor, Narva, Finland, Moldova, and the North Sea. 5 places, 5 types of risk. Each one is different, but they all have a common denominator. In a crisis, speed, logistics, geography, and political will are decisive. These factors determine if Europe can respond in time. Conclusion. These were the 5 places most often mentioned in security debates when it comes to the question of possible escalation in Europe. The Suwałki corridor as a logistical artery. Narva has a sensitive identity. Finland shares a long border. Moldova is outside Article 5. The North Sea is unseen infrastructure, but Europe can't function without it. None of these places is a definitive weakness. However, each of them is a place where a potential crisis could arise faster than Europe would wish. Not because war is certain, but because geography, politics, and technology sometimes meet at a point where even a small event can set something bigger in motion. Understanding these points doesn't mean predicting conflict. It means understanding the map and its consequences. Now here's a question for you. Which of these places do you think is riskiest? Or do you think there's another one that isn't talked about enough? Write it in the comments.
If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a like and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones I'm working on. You can support my work with gratitude. To help the video reach more people, click praise. Thank you.